Hey everyone, in this video we'll be taking a look at a few random border oddities around the world and how they came to be. To start off, let's look at a country which has seemingly made a point of stealing Bosnia's coast, namely Croatia. And just to be clear, Croatia obviously didn't steal any coastline on purpose. The modern borders are a result of the country's history. The modern Croatian border was essentially created through wars between the Austrian and Ottoman empires. The South Slavs in reality are very closely related, but a major thing that divided them was religion. When the Catholic and Orthodox churches first split, Bosnia and Croatia were a bit of a borderland with followers of both Christian sects. But with both the Austrians, Hungarians, and Venetians ruling over Croatia for centuries, it ended up becoming mostly Catholic. The Serbs, meanwhile, remained mostly Orthodox, and Bosnia remained a border region, being home to many Orthodox Serbs, Catholic Croats, and due to Ottoman rule, Bosniak Muslims. Of course, not all these groups adhere to a specific religion. The religion is just what contributed the most to making these groups distinguished from one another, as they all speak very similar languages. Some would even argue dialects of the same language. To elaborate a bit on the history, while the Bosnian-Croatian border was for a while the Ottoman-Habsburg border, Austria-Hungary did eventually gain control over Bosnia. But the cultural and administrative boundaries remained, and much later when Yugoslavia broke up, these administrative boundaries simply remained despite not exactly following ethnic, cultural, or religious lines. Another quirk of the Croatian-Bosnian border is that Bosnia and Herzegovina actually does have a tiny piece of coastline that separates the southern tip of Croatia, including the town of Dubrovnik, from the rest of Croatia. Although the Piljesak Bridge will likely soon end this isolation and allow for direct access by road without having to pass through Bosnia. But why does Bosnia have this tiny piece of coastline then? Well, as you know, the Croatian border is pretty much the Austrian-Ottoman border for much of history. But before that, this Dalmatian portion of the border was between Venice, Ragusa, today called Dubrovnik, and of course the Ottomans. Originally, Ragusa and Venice actually had a border, while the Bosnian part of the Ottoman Empire did not have any coastline. But Ragusa sold the small piece of coastline to the Ottomans as to avoid a conflict with Venice. And that little border oddity has managed to remain till this day, despite the many different powers that have ruled in this region. Moving over to the area between the Baltics and Poland, there is another interesting little border oddity. While the layman may just think this is some small European country, us geography nerds know this is actually a part of Russia. So how did Russia end up with this sliver of land completely disconnected from the rest of Russia? Well, the land was actually carved out of Germany after World War II, specifically the region that used to be East Prussia. Southern East Prussia went to Poland, while the northern portion, which included the port city of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, went to the Soviet Union, specifically the Russian SSR, the largest of the many Soviet republics, and the one that became modern Russia. The USSR took the land for itself mainly because it wanted a larger and warmer port than those in Latvia and Lithuania, allowing for it to project more power in the Baltic Sea. Of course, then it could still have just given it to Lithuania, but as the USSR expelled the local German population of East Prussia, it would mainly be resettled by Russians. So despite proposals of Lithuania annexing it later on, they simply weren't interested as the region was home to almost 1 million Russians. A question you might still have is why East Prussia was then separate from the rest of Germany, with a Polish corridor in between. The short answer is the land between East Prussia and the rest of Germany was given to Poland following World War I. But it makes even more sense once you look at a linguistic map of the German Empire right before its dissolution and replacement by the Weimar Republic. Many of the lost territories were not German-speaking, and a corridor roughly lining up with the post-World War I Polish-German border is pretty clearly visible, as it was home to a majority and significant minority, depending on the region, of Polish speakers and Kashubian speakers, Kashubian being a Slavic language closely related to Polish. Moving way over to Southeast Asia, you may have noticed how Myanmar and Thailand split the narrow stretch of land that is the northern Malay Peninsula. The border didn't always look like this, and is a result of the many Burmese-Siamese wars, with Burma and Siam simply being old names for Myanmar and Thailand, with some historical and political connotations. The original Thai-Myanmar border was further west back during the Thai Ayutthaya Kingdom, but between the 1500s and 1700s, the border went back and forth several times as a result of various wars, and it finally ended up where it is today during the Burmese Kunbaung dynasty, which managed to win a major conflict and subjugate Thailand, as well as take this western coast of the peninsula. Thailand, or Siam as it was referred to at the time, quickly gained its independence, but the border remained on the peninsula till this day. Apart from the history, there is also a geographic reasoning for the border, as it's mostly very hilly terrain with dense forests, making it fairly difficult to traverse. Just to the east is another country with interesting borders, Vietnam, one of the several countries in the world that seem to oddly straddle the coasts. In Vietnam's case, it's these two thicker regions with just sort of a narrow stretch of land connecting them. So how did Vietnam end up this way? Well, the people that would become the modern Vietnamese had their origins in this thicker northern part of Vietnam, and according to experts were likely a part of a larger group of people that were also the native inhabitants of southern China, referred to as the Yue. Although the intricacies of how closely related they were, or if the Vietnamese are direct descendants, is pretty much lost to history, as China culturally assimilated these lands very early in their history, resulting in the modern Cantonese and countless other southern Chinese languages that are related to Mandarin and not Vietnamese. Still, the early Vietnamese civilizations and kingdoms would exist only in the northern portion, and it would be the Dai Viet kingdom that really kicked off the southern expansion. This expansion would mostly follow the coast for a reason you might already have predicted, as I mentioned it quite a bit in my previous video on long countries, and its mountainous terrain. The Annamite range of mountains separates Vietnam from modern Laos, so the only way the Dai Viet kingdom could feasibly expand was southward along the coast. During the final years of the Nguyen dynasty is when Vietnam would finally get its modern borders. It would be conquered by the French soon after, but once French Indochina fell, the Vietnamese border would follow the borders of the old Nguyen dynasty once again. Over on the island of Borneo, there is the small nation of Brunei, which oddly enough is split into two main regions completely separated by Malaysia. The reason for this is that Brunei today is a tiny remnant of a much larger entity that existed for centuries before. Just before it became the small country it is today, it roughly followed the borders of the Malaysian part of Borneo. Brunei lost most of its land to the Raj of Sarawak in the late 1800s. The Raj of Sarawak has quite an interesting origin, as it was originally a small kingdom established by Sir James Brooke. The small province of Kuching was given to him by the Sultanate of Brunei as a reward for him helping fight piracy and insurgency among the indigenous people in Brunei. With this new kingdom, James Brooke would demand more and more territory from Brunei, eventually taking almost all their land. The final territorial changes would happen not long after, as both the Raj of Sarawak and Brunei became British protectorates, and the border has remained till this day even after Sarawak joined Malaysia. But that's about all for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you to all my channel members, and a special thank you to my second tier member, Lada Hino. He's been kind enough to support the channel for well over a year now, so I promised I would mention that he has his own YouTube channel. I'll see you all in my next video.